Let me just snip some tripwires first. No, it's not only worth talking about, or any worse, when it just happens to Jewish people. No, these terror attacks are not, as Sadiq Khan suggested, part and parcel of living in a big city or in a white Western country. These are not normal. These are not the... This should not become the white noise of managed decline. This should not become the price we pay for being nice and diverse and tolerant. All of these have to stop, and they will only stop through remigration. Remigration is the only way to keep us and our countrymen safe. And by our countrymen, perhaps this makes me a soft-hearted liberal. But I do mean the people who live here lawfully who we would like to remain here. Now, lots of people killed in this Bondi shooting, details of which we'll go through in a moment, appear to have been tourists, members of the international Jewish diaspora. So there's someone from New York and someone from Britain killed here. And even though they do not share our faith, I think all good Christians and Catholics should pray for their families, the fact that they'd be grieving. One, I believe the British rabbi in question has left behind 4 or 5 children. He's 41 years old. He just had a 1-year-old son born last year. So, unimaginable tragedy that his family are enduring tonight. Pray for his soul. But again, perhaps it makes me a soft-hearted liberal. I don't think people who have done nothing wrong, even though they don't share our faith or our ethnic extraction, are any less deserving of our compassion. However, this example should highlight something that lots of people won't talk about. It's an angle that won't be discussed. And that is that we are now a Middle Eastern PvP server. Muslims are shooting at Jews on their holy days, whether it's Yom Kippur in Manchester earlier in October, whether it's now Hanukkah in Australia. And aside from references to the Old Testament in early English Christianity, of course, King Alfred the Great basing his Doom book on the life of Moses and putting a copy of the Ten Commandments at the front of it, these are religions which have historically not been present in the Anglosphere. We've always been Christian countries. Australia has always been an Anglo-Celtic country. It was not a country back when there were a few Aboriginals sitting around without any technology believing in the rainbow spirit. It was not Australia. Australians are an Anglo-Celtic people whose hardiness and Christianity built a series of oases on the coast of a gigantic desert. And they have nothing but my respect for that. And notice how, in this entire exchange, there wasn't any natives present in being attacked. They might have been guests at the Hanukkah celebration, so correct me if I'm wrong. But this battle between Muslims and Jews, it just doesn't need to happen. Now, I will note, it's not the Jews doing the shooting. However, as we will get onto later, there are lots of left-wing Jewish people who have encouraged this kind of migration, which has led to this happening. And that is something that the Jewish community, because there is an international diaspora, who elect representatives of themselves, need to sort out. And they need to sort it out fast. Because they're dying and our people are dying too. But the reason none of this needs to happen is not a single Muslim needs to be imported into Australia, into Britain, into America, into Europe. Not one. And the Trump administration now know this with their international security strategy. And it's high time our respective countries caught wind of this too. But unfortunately, of course, they won't. They will continue to betray us. So, details of the shooting as follows. 11 people have been killed. That's 11 families without their loved ones tonight. 29 injured, including a child. This is the first major mass shooting in Australia since the 1996 Port Arthur massacre, where it says 35 people were killed, 23 injured by a gunman named Martin Bryant, and he was Australian and seems to have been a deranged fellow. So look, you're always going to get violent crazies in any civilization. The question is not just what proportion of violent crazies that you get in any one given civilization. because one of the perpetrators was Pakistani, and when you have an 80% cousin marriage rate, you tend to get a hell of a lot more crazies. But it's also whether or not any of these foreign criminals need to be in our country in the first place, because the very presence of every single foreign criminal is a choice. It is a consequence of government policy. And so these 11 people didn't need to be dead. Not just because they themselves, some of them, didn't need to be in Australia, like, you know, the British Jew or the American Jew. If they hadn't have gone to this event, they wouldn't have been killed, but it's not their fault. It's just a problem of wrong place, wrong time. But because the killers themselves didn't need to be in Australia. The Pakistani grooming gang perpetrators didn't need to be in the UK. The Muslim who committed the New Year's terror attack that's basically been memory hold in New Orleans, in America, didn't need to be in America. Neither did the Boston Marathon bombers. Neither did Lee Rigby's murderers, or the London Bridge attackers, or the Charlie Hebdo massacre perpetrators, or the Bataclan massacre perpetrators, or the Westminster Bridge attackers, or the 7/7 bombers, or the Glasgow airport thwarted terror attackers, or the Yom Kippur attacker, even. None of these people needed to be here. Valdo Calacane, Raxel Rudacabana, Anthony Williams. None of these people needed to be here. I am going to turn off that alert box if you can't be responsible. So, none of these people need to be in our countries, and so the question is, why? And why are our politicians still unwilling to draw distinctions between groups of people who reliably commit these kinds of murders, terror attacks, and sex crimes? And we're going to be confronting some of those politicians and academics very shortly, because I've just had yet another argument with Stella Creasy, who exemplified this unwillingness to draw distinctions between groups of people, and the performative contradictions that she knows she is doing at the expense of the safety of innocent lives and women and girls. Anyway, so the shots were fired from a footbridge just over a children's play area towards Bondi Beach at around 7:45 in the morning UK time, but this is, of course, the evening in Australia, 6:45 at night. And the two gunmen were involved. One is dead, another is injured and in police custody. We'll get onto the dead one in a moment. One of the gunmen was actually chased down and apprehended by a Muslim. And so this, of course, has been the story. It's that, well, you know, two Muslims shot up a Yom Kippur event. Someone's just said Manchester Arena and Southport. They were mentioned. But thank you for the reminder. Someone's just said, well, you know, two Muslims just shot up a Jewish event and a Muslim saved him. So, you know, we're basically only down by 1 point. Take that, bigot. Muslim stepped in. Do you not realise that if the gunman hadn't been in the country in the first place, said Muslim man wouldn't have had to step in? Also, as it says here, the bystander who did tackle him, and there is footage of the event that I won't go through fully, but as you can see, he runs towards him, tackles him to the ground, points the gun at him. He then discards the gun, and the gunman then runs to retreat to join his accomplice on the footbridge and picks up another gun and continues shooting. So, look, this chap was injured, he did his best, but if he would have detained him and continued pointing the gun at him, then more people probably would have lived. So, he didn't handle it in exemplary fashion. Now, it's all well and good to armchair quarterback someone in a crisis scenario, but I was discussing this with someone earlier, and we said as well, he would have been totally justified in shooting said gunman in self-defense, and there would be, the Australian government might well have gone after him because, you know, a bunch of people were arrested when they were kicking the other gunman while he was down on the bridge, in footage that I can't show you because it shows someone getting shot. So the Australian government, the police, I mean, look at how they behaved during COVID. You can't trust them. They could well have arrested Mr. Ahmed Al-Ahmed, who, again, was the guy who detained the shooter. But there would be no jury in Australia who would convict him of murder for gunning down said terrorist when, again, he got up and went and took the gun. So if we would have acted in snappier fashion, then, again, people's lives would have been saved. So, some more details here. Sky News explain how the shooting unfolded. So, at 7:15 p.m. on Sunday, police responded to shots being fired at Arch Park, Bondi Beach, New South Wales Premier Chris Minns said 2 individuals fired on a crowded group of families. There is footage of people running and screaming, which I can't show, at the park. Officers have declared the attack a terrorist incident, which is great because Sky News, as per usual, seem to have expressed a bit of confusion as to whether or not one man from Pakistan and another unnamed assailant, there are images circulating on X that I won't show in case it is the wrong man and the wrong name, but they expressed confusion as to whether or not 2 Muslims firing on a Jewish event on Hanukkah had anything to do with terror, or whether or not the gunshots towards Hanukkah had anything to do with it at all. Completely playing dumb. Sky News, as usual, the enemy. So, this is Ahmed Al-Ahmed. He takes them down. More than 1,000 people were at the event. And of course, there's the usual denunciation saying from Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, "Our heart bleeds for Australia's Jewish community." Okay. Understandable. Why do you keep importing people that want to shoot at them then? Because Keir Starmer actually said something very similar. I'll pull this tweet up. Keir Starmer, again, whose wife is Jewish, so you would think that this might be a personal moment for him, a moment of reflection to keep his own family safe. But he wrote on Twitter, "Hanukkah should be a time of celebration and joy. The news that the Bondi Beach attack was an anti-Semitic terrorist attack against Jewish families at a Hanukkah event is sickening. My thoughts are with the victims and their families. The United Kingdom will always stand with Australia and the Jewish community. We're actively working with, I believe it's Canberra. Oh no, the UK's Jewish Security Organisation on the policing of Hanukkah events." Okay, a few things here. Number 1, why do Jewish events need any security? We all know why. It's an anti-Semitic terrorist attack. By who, Piers? It's by, yet again, Muslims. Just like the Yom Kippur one was. Just like all the terror attacks against white Brits, that rather than this massive outpouring of outrage about the persecution of Jews, you were happy to call people complaining about it far-right racists, and the entire government apparatus continues to mobilise Raiku, the Don't Look Back in Anger department, to tell white Brits that you can't notice the fact that Muslims are disproportionately overrepresented in every terror attack perpetrator, in the reason why the vast majority of deaths and injuries by terrorism since 1999, they're the overwhelming number of terrorists on MFI's watch list, overwhelming number of terror suspects in prison. You can't notice that pattern and keep yourself safe, because that would be racist. But when Jews are targeted, we must move heaven and earth to protect the Jewish community. We can't say from who, because then that would implicate both progressive Jewish organisations like the Board of Deputies, who couple anti-Semitism with Islamophobia and encourage importing more Muslims into the country, as does progressive Jews like Barbara Roach. And again, not all Jews. There are some right-wing Jews that hate this sort of stuff. Eric Kaufman, Paul Morland, Dominic Green, etc. But they're in a minority and they're not leading organisations. And it would also implicate the politicians themselves, who, like Keir Starmer, once made excuses for Hizb ut-Tahrir when he was working at the Crown Prosecution Service. He wrote to the European Convention on Human Rights to prevent the then Conservative opposition from banning them as a prescribed organisation, saying they were an important voice that deserved to be heard in democracy. So he's defended jihadist organisations before in his capacity as a lawyer pro bono. So excuse me if I don't believe your concern here. And Steve Laws, who, again, I disagree with Steve on the need to expel people who are half English and half of another ethnicity to the nation of their non-English ancestors. I think that would be unjust. But Steve and I agree on remigration, certainly for these types of figures. He notes, Wayne Broadhurst didn't deserve a press conference, did he? Neither did Rhiannon Sky White. Neither did the Huntington train stabbers. Neither did the 3 girls murdered at Southport. They didn't deserve this sort of massive named outpouring. Instead, you either were totally stumm or spent more time complaining about the people's reaction to the crimes than you did about the crimes themselves, than you did about doing anything to prevent the further crimes from occurring. And so I responded here with another point, that Keir Starmer is just as culpable in this as Anthony Albanese, because Starmer nearly dropped Albanese's trousers for him when he was at Labour Party conference. They're running the same policy of reckless demographic vandalism and multicultural appeasement in Australia as we are in Britain, as they are in Canada, as they are across Europe. Very conspicuous. Now, I happen to fall on the lines of this being an ideological post-war consensus rather than a deliberate conspiracy, but there are lots of people pushing it. There are lots of people manufacturing consent for demographic replacement, and you're just hearing openly ethnocidal Rwanda-style rhetoric at this point, and we wonder why there are mass murders committed, not just against Jews, but against whites too. There was just a terror attack thwarted today at a German Christmas market. That one, again, barely deserved a tweet from our ruling political class, but that wasn't against Jews, that was against white Christians. In a country that has been overwhelmingly accommodating to the Syrians and other ethnicities that attempted to carry it out. I think there were 3 perpetrators. Two were Syrian, I think. Let me just look this up. But remember, Mama Merkel said, "Wir schaffen das." It turns out that "we can do it" just meant we can accommodate people that want to commit murderous terror attacks against us. Here we go. 5 arrested over a plot to attack German Christmas market. German intelligence have thwarted it. 3 Moroccans, an Egyptian and a Syrian. Why are any of them in Germany? Why are any of them in Europe? And even, by the way, even if Islam were being practiced peacefully, it would not reproduce our civilization. It doesn't belong here. Now, Islam is not the only problem. See Axel Ritter and Anthony Williams and all of these other black schizo stabbers. But Islam is the most lethal, most common ideology, and they see themselves as an ethnic group, so ethnicity that perpetrate terrorism. So they don't belong here. They just don't belong here. It's not a risk that we should have to take. But instead, notice how the response is only ever the expansion of the surveillance powers and security apparatus of the Leviathan state. So we're going to be working with, for example, a sectarian Jewish security organization, and one that cracks down on anti-Jewish terrorism, in order to protect Jews going to their respective events, while also Keir Starmer, in the aftermath of Southport, gives more money to mosques to beef up their security. And so the state creates all these little fiefdoms, insulating one another from the natural religious and ethnic antagonisms from thousands of years of blood feuds, thousands of miles away in stretches of desert in the Middle East, that don't involve the native populations of our respective countries, Britain, America, Australia, etc. And by native, by the way, I mean white. Because again, without us, there is no country. Doesn't involve us at all. We're the ones left out in the cold. We're the ones who don't have any political representation. We're the ones paying for all this. And we're the ones also getting killed. And notice, we don't get extra security. We don't get press conferences convened to have our concerns heard. And so, in all of this, in this absolute tragedy, which again, please pray for the families, it is us who's having to bear the brunt. We are at the coalface of, we are paying the bill for violent and non-violent replacement alike. And so, I'm just not hearing the moral hall monitoring from our politicians on this one, when you have created this situation through the immigration policy that none of us wanted. Remigration now, or you will all have more blood on your hands. Further details, there's a chap here who actually lived through October 7th. I mean, blimey, this is brutal. And again, heavy criticisms of Israel, the people that were caught as innocents in the October 7th massacre. Absolutely horrific. This guy, I mean, I hate to make a joke, but you wouldn't rub him for good luck. I mean, he's just survived 2 brutal massacres. Dear Lord. So, again, this is the face of someone who did not need to have this happen to them if the perpetrators were not imported into Australia. So who is the perpetrator that has been identified? Naveed Akram, who was shot dead. So the other guy, still alive, hasn't been officially named yet, so I'm reserving. But Naveed Akram is Pakistani, originally from Lahore, Pakistan. Now, how was this reported by the Australian press? Sydney man. Fuck you. No. He was never Australian. He will never be Australian. He died a Pakistani terrorist. He did not need to be in Australia. And just by being in a place physically does not make him inextricably Australian as the law-abiding native population. But then it is these euphemisms that keep these attacks happening, because you can't draw distinctions between groups even though the patterns are obvious, even though Muslims commit more terror, even though black people commit more crime. You can't draw these distinctions because, of course, that would be racist, that would violate the blank slate, and you, noticing differences, are the only thing standing in the way of John Lennon's Imagine being made real. If only John Lennon had kept singing, if only MLK had kept dreaming, if only JFK had given another speech, we would all be holding hands and singing Kumbaya in a post-racial egalitarian utopia. This dream is getting people killed. This ideology is getting people murdered. And yet, our political elite will not back away from it. So, this chap showed that from an Islamic centre in Australia showed that Akram completed religious studies in 2022, raising questions about possible radicalisation and extremist networks operating in the country. It's just Islam. It's that simple. Everywhere Islam goes, terror follows. He declined to comment, the head of the Al Murad Islamic Centre, good Australian name, Adam Ismail, he declined to comment when he was contacted by the Telegraph. Now, there are photos obtained by Visegrad here. He studied at Handard University in Islamabad, Pakistan. Again, as Visegrad asks, which characters was he in touch with? Because we've only just had the Yom Kippur terror attack by... His name means holy warrior from Syria. His first name is literally Jihad. Jihad al-Shami, I think it was. We've had that one. We've had this one. This comes about a month or so after ISIS called for its cells internationally to commit stabbing, shooting, car ramming attacks in the white Christian West. And they're particularly resentful and violent against Jews for reasons we'll discuss in a moment. But if you, and this has been my source of frustration over the last few weeks, if anyone on the right thinks that we can make common cause with Islam because we have criticisms of Israel, because we notice a double standard between some Jews who enjoy Israel being an ethno-state to protect their people versus insisting that Europe and America and the Anglosphere must be liberal and multicultural and accommodate demographic replacement and terrorists like this. If you think that in order to defeat that double standard, in order to oppose the hypocrisies present within Zionism, in order to end the war in Gaza, if you think that we can make common cause with Muslims to do that, then you will just aid and abet your own replacement, whether violently or via policy. So it is a stupid plan, and they hate Christians just as much as they do Jews. They see us as people of the wrong book, and they will commit violence against us too. Anyway, so Drew Pavlo put out the following photo that was taken from the event. This is him standing on the bridge. Ozpil shared the same. And as all the comments say, from Justin McGovern, from myself, remigration. Immediately. Sorry, the risk is just too great. You had your fun in Australia, you couldn't play nice. We were far too welcoming in Britain, in Canada, in America, across Europe. And you just ruined it for everyone. So, sorry, shut the doors, no more. Return people we don't want back to their homelands. That's it. That's it. Doesn't mean literally everyone of every skin tone has to go, but it does mean that criminals, people who do not share the Christian faith of the respective countries, people who are benefits dependents, people who were just imported on various visas that were invented in order to subsidize the falling demographics or fudge the numbers on GDP to prop up the pension system against the wishes of the voters, they just have to go home. And that's okay. That's the moderate, peaceful solution before attacks like this continue and, as has been projected by many experts, not me, things boil over into ethnic conflict. Something that nobody wants. There is still a democratic off-ramp. There is still a policy choice that can be made by any government. Albanese could do this tomorrow if he likes, and he won't. Starmer could do it. He won't. And we'll get into the reasons why. But you could solve this problem tomorrow. You could stop all the sex attacks. You could stop all the terror attacks. You could return these people to their respective countries. I mean, why is there a single Pakistani in Britain? They have Pakistan. We gave it to them. They were very clear that they wanted English people out of their country. There was no confusion as to who was and wasn't Pakistani when it came time to decolonize. Rudyard Kipling is not considered an Indian, neither is Joanna Lumley. They had to go. In Rhodesia, did they think that white Rhodesians were exactly the same as modern-day Zimbabweans? Did they and ah about whether or not whites would be able to stay in their country, or did they declare themselves sovereign and independent and insist that they had a nation of their own? And then, over time, act as if there was a universal right to access white people's countries and come over there and take from their largesse and commit crimes against them. As, unfortunately, seems to be in the nature of many Pakistani diasporas, because, as Patrick Nash's work for Oxford University, so you're not a far-right conspiracy outlet, has shown, there are Pakistani Biradari clans operating in Britain that practice cousin marriage at rates of 80%. Now, this has quite a downward pressure on impulse control, on intelligence, and incentivizes criminality. So, I don't think any of these people who marry their cousins and siblings and children are compatible with our civilization. Thank you very much. You never will be. We entertained a delusion for a little while. You had your fun. You earned a lot of money. Now you get to go home. And I think that's just sensible. Now again, that doesn't mean like someone like Ben Habib has to be kicked out of the country. But it does mean that pretty much everyone from those respective countries will fall afoul of our criteria and just not make it. I'm just going to throw this super chat up on the screen because I can't... I'll see if I can find out how to do this. I cannot disagree more with the super chat. Someone's just sent in, the men can go back, we'll keep a few women here. If you think that children will not be further radicalized by the fact that you've deported their father while keeping their mother in the country, if you think that just being born on British soil, raised with British values, put through Britain's institutions, will make the children of immigrants from countries that have practiced cousin marriage at a rate of 80% for thousands of years, that have had hundreds of years of Islam baked into their culture, they share none of our moral priors, they barely have a grasp on the technology that we have, they don't share our cultural frame of reference, they come from different climates, they don't actually like the weather that we have, the animals that we have. Like, if you think that people so far afield from our way of life can snap, by and large, into being peaceful citizens, indecipherable from the native population within one generation, you are deluded. Not going to happen. So no, like Tom Homan said, families will have to be deported together. And that's fine, they can just go back to Pakistan and make a life for themselves there. Hey, I keep being told that they're GDP rocket fuel. I keep being told they're the best and brightest. So Pakistan will be a veritable oasis. It will be like Coruscant from the Star Wars prequels by the time remigration is done. Won't it be wonderful that Pakistan will be a thriving liberal democracy with GDP and a space program? I mean, not having it. Sorry, we don't have to accommodate any of these people. They can go back. Now that's my response to this situation. What was the responses from the commentariat class? From politicians? Well, we've got everyone's favourite, Piers Morgan here. As you can see the comments already, we can assess. What the hell is happening on Bondi Beach? Some horrific videos coming out of what seems to be a mass shooting. 2 men firing indiscriminately onto a packed beach. Yes, Piers, it's the inevitable outcome of the immigration policy that you supported and told Tucker Carlson was an evolution when it happens to Britain. So yeah, this was always going to happen. These are the terror attacks that you think, as Keith Woods points out, are acceptable so that you can fill your trough with foreign slop, so that you can eat curry, so that you can have authentic poppadoms. This is the consequence of the politics that you support. And then Piers said, again doubling down, it was a Muslim hero disarmed one of them. Okay, Piers, do you understand that if said Muslim gunman hadn't been in the country in the first place, the Muslim hero, who didn't actually stop the gunman, would not have had to charge him and put his life in danger? Do you understand that if they had been back in Pakistan and wherever the other guy, whose identity I'm sure we'll find out soon, was from, nobody would be dead and nobody would have had to step into that situation. And then people will say, by the way, well, if the Jewish diaspora wasn't there, they wouldn't have had the event that would have drawn so much attention from the Muslims in the first place. Now, I think the Jewish diaspora would have had their event without a terror attack happening if there were no Muslims in Australia. But again, lots of liberal Jews have invited Muslims into Europe, Australia, Canada, the US, and the UK at their own expense. And so my rejoinder to that would be, okay, let's say there weren't any Jews in Australia. It's not like in Britain where Jews have been in Britain on and off for about 1,000 years, right? Let's say they all left Australia and went to Israel. Good for them, because they have an Israel. They have a country to protect themselves. Australia is not protecting Australians. It's submerging them in waves of migration, increasing, unceasing, from India, from China, and now, even after an Islamic terror attack, back in Sydney when the Orthodox bishop was stabbed, I don't think the terrorist in that case has been named either, is he? Because I think he was 17 at the time. So even after a terror attack, that should have been like, right, shutters go down, no more Muslims in Australia. Not worth it. I think we can survive this. Even after that, nope, still kept coming. And so, let's say all the Jews left Australia. Okay, I'm sure it would be a shame, because lots of people probably have Jewish friends and they haven't caused any trouble, and they haven't been the liberal Jews that have invited the Muslims in. But let's say they all left for Israel, right? We would probably lose something in our respective countries, but the Jews would survive in Israel. Let's say mass migration continues in Australia, the UK, the US, etc. Our people go extinct, and we don't have an Israel to retreat to. So, yes, it's horrific that these terror attacks have happened this year twice on Jewish holidays, but they've been happening against white Europeans for decades now. The grooming gang scandal is still ongoing, and we have no citadel to retreat to in the Middle East to survive ethnic cleansing in our respective homelands. So I just want what Israel has, and the only way to get it is remigration. And the only reason that the Israelis, by the way, haven't engaged in remigration for its Arab quarter in Jerusalem is because they know that this would cause such furor in the surrounding region that they would be descended upon by all their Arab neighbours, and they wouldn't be able to defend themselves, especially without the US's assistance. And the US, under the Trump administration, don't want to get involved in a boots on the ground permanent deployment in the Middle East that costs more American blood and treasure. But make no mistake, Jews would rather have Israel to themselves, and that makes perfect sense, by the way, because I wouldn't want to share my country with a bunch of jihadists either. I mean, if they recognise, right, that... Because there was a bus attack in Tel Aviv a couple of months ago. I think it was September, maybe? If they recognise that... Oh no, it's Jerusalem. If they recognise that Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and that are constantly under threat from Islamic terrorists, then why would you make Sydney like Tel Aviv? Why would you make London like Tel Aviv? Why would you make New York or New Orleans like Tel Aviv? Do you not think there might be a sort of self-preservation mechanism that needs to kick in at some point here? Because it certainly has for us. But, of course, anytime that self-preservation mechanism manifests among young men like me who have only grown up in this dangerous, heterogeneous, culturally and ethnically fractured world, we're called white nationalists, we're called white supremacists, we're called racists, we're called fascists, we're called literally the next step in the resurrection of Adolf Hitler and the reconstruction of gas chambers. We have the memory of the Second World War and the atrocities of the 20th century browbeaten into us to say, here's why you don't get to have a country, an identity, a history. You don't get to say that there's anything virtuous about your civilization, because otherwise it leads to the persecution of Jews. Okay, well, that mentality has imported a bunch of Muslims that are shooting Jews, it turns out, so maybe let's abandon that mentality, Mr. Danny Finkelstein. Maybe that would be a good idea. No? Okay. And here is the same mentality that's endemic, the immediate coupling of Islam and Judaism, so you can't actually address the problem, by Nick Robinson. Now, Nick Robinson is a BBC journalist. Actually, I don't think he is. I once sat on a train opposite him. No way. Okay, I thought Nick Robinson was English, but... This is why I don't believe in Jewish conspiracy theories, because if they were really that well organised to run everything, they would have a much better PR department. Anyway, so Nick Robinson put out this tweet. The news from Bondi Beach is grim. For many, it will have terrible echoes of the massacres on October 7th. Yes. For Jews living here, it will feel painfully close to the murders at a synagogue in Manchester. It is a reminder, if one was needed, that Jews all over the world now live in fear. That is actually an accurate assessment, by the way. If you struggle to understand that fear, you may not have any Jewish friends or family, as it is a very small community. I urge you to think of the impact on the Muslim and indeed the wider community of the Christchurch mosque attack in New Zealand. Muslims commit a terror attack in Australia, killing Jews and endangering native Australians. But like the Norm MacDonald joke, have you thought about the backlash on innocent Muslims? This is the suicidal mentality that puts, and I was going to say native Brits, but in Nick's case also Jews, at risk. Because, yet again, you extend empathy out to a constituency that gives you no such consideration and is largely indifferent to your suffering. With people like this, who are incapable of drawing value distinctions and the right conclusions, you will keep having these atrocities committed. This guy's very senior at the BBC. He's responded, I'm sad to see that some have reacted angrily to my post about the attack on Bondi Beach this morning, which sought to explain to people beyond the Jewish community and those who don't know anyone who is Jewish the full horror of what has happened and the fear it would reinforce in the community. Nick, you could have chosen the rape gangs. You could have chosen all of the terror attacks against the French or the Germans or the Brits or the Americans, but you didn't. You decided to yet again empathise with an oppressed minority, the same minority that is perpetrating the attack, and omit and literally pit against the native Brits who are paying for this, or native Australians or native Americans, to happen in their country. At no point did you consider the native population. And it is that got you the backlash. It is that. Still in your empathetic, considerate post, you are still showing more concern for the identity and the religion of the perpetrators than of the bystanders whose lives are endangered, of the people whose lands have been invaded, of the people who are silenced and suppressed and thrown in prison via hate speech laws, even if they notice this trend and talk about it. You showed more consideration for the identity and religion of the perpetrators than for those people who are bearing the costs of these crimes. So, speaking of idiotic responses and hate speech, let's look at the political response, shall we? We've already seen Keir Starmer's reaction. I think that's pretty representative of the Labour Party. We've seen what Albanese has said. He's rattling off his banal platitudes. What about the Conservatives? Right, at this time you'd think, oh, there's a massive space in public mood. 53% of the British public think that Islam is incompatible with being British. We've had endless terror attacks. We've got the Boris way to sort of repair our reputation from. What do? Well, Chris Philp went on GB News today, and he said that we need to tighten racial hatred laws in Britain. Chris Philp acknowledged members of the Jewish community in Britain will feel unsafe. I think it's our responsibility, or the government's responsibility, to redouble efforts to protect the Jewish community and fight anti-Semitism. Because it starts with anti-Semitism, and then it escalates into acts of terrorist violence like we saw in Manchester a few weeks ago. And potentially, I do say potentially, like we may be seeing in Australia now. Mr. Philp continued to rage against violence throughout the Jewish community, condemning chants like globalise the Intifada. I mean, I condemn that, but just because, globalise the Intifada means wage jihadist revolution against whites. So it means me, actually, as a Christian. So yeah, I hate that. It implicates me too. He said, they need to stop using that kind of language. When we see anti-Semitism being rampant, we see terrorist attacks against the Jewish community, including, as I say, here in the UK just a few weeks ago, I think language that incites racial hatred. That's illegal already, and those laws should be policed more robustly first of all. Ah yes, the conservative case for further censorship, which will undoubtedly be wielded more against the native population than it will against Muslims. Which will lead to the conviction of the likes of Sam Melia for offensive stickers, more than it will the prevention of Muslim terrorists who your party and the existing party, and pretty much every party, and I mean every party, will keep importing. You know how we fix this? Rather than subjecting the native population to further censorship measures for talking about obvious truths, or skirting the line on edgy statements, you should be able to say, frankly, as long as it's not a call to violence, whatever you like. You should be able to indulge in as kooky a conspiracy theory as you care for. Rather than that, how about we just not have Islam in Britain? Because you don't get Britain out of Islam. You don't get Australia out of Islam. You don't get America out of Islam. You get Muslim countries out of Islam. And if you want to live in a Muslim country, be my guest. I don't want to. I never voted to import one. You decided to do it at my expense anyway. And Chris Phillips still, in his interview with Stephen Edgington, by the way, still can't connect these terror attacks, these crimes, the problems of migration with demographics. It's like the Lego bricks just aren't clicking together. Actually, Carl did a really good stream on this today. I'll pull it up and put it in the chat. So, Carl Benjamin, who, very good friend, still doing fantastic work over on Lower Seas and on his Sargon channel. You need to watch this. I will make sure that this tab is muted. He did a stream on Baudrillard's reality and hyper-reality. Oh, do I not have my chat open? Oh, it's because of this new bleeding... Here we go. Here's the link to Carl's stream. Watch it in your spare time. Put it on your watch later list. I always try and give you guys some more watching to do, right? Carl's stream is about... Actually, I picked up a book yesterday from Jean Baudrillard. He came up with the term hyperreality. The idea is that our political elites live in a discourse bubble completely disconnected from the consequences of what they say. It's similar to Rob Henderson's philosophy of luxury beliefs, right? They espouse these progressive platitudes without ever having to bear the cost of these policies. And we'll get onto one of those in a moment regarding London, because it's connected. The idea is, it's so jarring for us because we have moved so far from, in the instance of the Second World War, the inciting incident. We've moved so far from the actual Nazis, the actual Holocaust, the gravity well around which the post-war consensus spins, that we are not wedded to a hyper-reality. We just assess things dispassionately as they are. We just assess them as any other historical event. There are lessons to be learned, but we do not feel personally implicated in the collective guilt implied by the post-war consensus. The idea that if white people have countries, they'll become Adolf Hitler. Don't believe in it. Sorry, not going to happen. And so, this jarring hyperreality that people still buy into is becoming even more glaring as the manifest injustices of their dogmatic insistence on the blank slate, the idea that distinguishing between peoples and cultures and nations is itself racist. The more they insist that these things are disconnected entirely from the ideology they are implementing as policy that is leading these people to be in our countries, the more they insist that that is not the case, they are not implicated, it's not happening, the more jarring it's getting, the more existential the tensions are bubbling up, the more the friend-enemy distinction is factionalizing. And so, this is why these people seem completely disconnected and incapable of updating their programming, right? They're NPCs, they haven't had the dialogue tree extension yet, and we are all paying the price for it. We are living in a permanent war zone with respective foreign diasporas duking it out, one shooting at the other, at our expense, with our lives endangered, and we, apparently, have to live under the yoke of censorship law in order to prevent imported tribal minorities from threatening to kill or killing one another. Actually, I don't think we need to. We shouldn't have at all. Now, I saw someone in chat say, is reform going to be any better? Partially, but not fully. So this was Nigel Farage's response. If Keir Starmer was really concerned with hatred and violence against Jewish people, he would ban the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, that is true. You could ban the Muslim Brotherhood. If you ban the Muslim Brotherhood, you'd ban the Muslim Council of Britain and Islamic Relief and the Muslim Association of Britain and all of these other various front groups that both the Emiratis and the UK government in their respective reports have stated are connected to the Muslim Brotherhood. It's not me just pulling names out of my backside. There are citations for all of this. And I'm sure those organisations would dispute them, but hey, Turkey's a thing, right? Don't believe them. But it's not just the Muslim Brotherhood. Even if Islam were practiced entirely peacefully, it does not reproduce our civilization. Even if Islam were practiced entirely peacefully without the Muslim Brotherhood, which, jihadist organisations set up after the fall of the Ottoman Empire following the Second World War to launder ideas and encourage activity that brings about the recreation of a global caliphate again, even if the Muslim Brotherhood were toppled tomorrow, what, do you think it just goes away? I mean, sorry, this is the same mindset of people, right? That are on an eternal crusade against Nazism, even the Nazi party and all of its officials are dead and buried decades ago. Because, turns out, ideas are kind of contagious. And so, if you allow an idea to fester in a particular ethnic enclave, a pocket, right? Even if, let's say we had 100 Muslims living in Bradford, right? Even if that 100 for a generation were completely peaceful, they would have 3 to 4 children each. So then you'd have an extra 400 for the subsequent generation. And so the likelihood that there will be a radical, indistinguishable from the Muslim Brotherhood, even though the Muslim Brotherhood no longer exists, grows exponentially. And the reason is that seed of extremism, radicalism, Islamism, jihadism, whatever euphemism you'd like to use for it, that seed germinated within the scriptures of Islam itself. There are a number of citations that we'll go through in a moment. As long as you have Islam in your country, you will have terrorism. You will have FGM, you will have child abuse, you will have beheadings and honor violence, Sharia law, cousin marriage. You have all of these undesirable things so long as you accommodate this ideology. Now again, it's not just an ideological problem, it's as much an ethnic issue because non-Islamic people seem to have in-group preferences that manifest as violent out-group hatreds towards white people. And so, at scale, seems like, unfortunately, again, we've tried the multicultural experiment, people just don't mix very well. We're very individualistic. We take people as we meet them. I get on with lots of black people and lots of Indian people, and I met some nice Christian Pakistanis and all that. I can take people as I meet them. Unfortunately, that's not how the rest of the world operate. They're not like us Anglos, right? I'm sorry, they're just not. It would be very nice if they were. It would be very nice if we could all live in a very liberal country, because I actually don't like having to talk about this stuff all the time. It's really depressing. It's horrible to be so pessimistic. But generally speaking, I can kind of spot when people don't like us. And it seems like most of the outside world don't. So just banning the Muslim Brotherhood is not enough. And that's why I put, if any politician cared about keeping Britain safe, they would expel Islam from Britain. It's there. And Farage put out another tweet. The Hanukkah party shooting in Australia is horrendous. The threat is everywhere. The threat is Islam, Nigel. And you can acknowledge it. You can just say it. The pattern is clear. The public know it. The public don't like it. The public don't want it. And you can't solve the problem until you confront it. Now, this reminder is Nigel Farage. He has yet to retract. And people are going, I'll get shit from this, right? People are going to go, oh, why don't you argue with the left? Why are you focusing on reform? Why are you attacking the one chance we have to topple the uni party? It's like, guys, reform don't need my help to get elected, right? I had this conversation with a reform supporter in the last week. I'm not trying to be an MP. I'm not trying to get a safe seat. I'm not trying to get a secure political appointment. I'm not trying to go on campus tours for reform youth or whatever they end up generating, right? If I'm invited to events to speak at them or do debates or whatever, I'm happy to show up and just speak my mind and get the message out there just because I think that's important. I wouldn't be engaging in this if I didn't. But that isn't going to keep me from holding my tongue. And so the fact that I am on the outside of these parties means I'm kind of in a privileged position to play the villain, as it were. To keep forcing issues, even if it's at the expense of me being in the club, to make it too large to ignore. We did that with mass deportations, right? Everyone in here, I'm sure you participated. Stephen Edgington did it in his interview with Farage. I did it at a Reform conference. Rupert Lowe did it at the expense of him being in the party. We all did it in the Twitter mentions. Every Anon played their part. And notice, despite accusations that I was previously soft on this, I've never been a civic nationalist, and I never counter-signaled anyone on the substance of things like mass deportations or getting lots of people to go home. Only on the prudence of which vehicle would be able to carry that out. There's a very important distinction, because you don't want to hitch your wagon to people who are downwardly mobile, because they will sink your talking points along with their career, along with being antisocial retards who attract government infiltration. Anyway, so the one issue we need to force on reform in the next year is Islam. It's one of the issues, but it is the main issue. We will force them to confront it. And if this means me burning most of my bridges with people in reform, with who are my own friends, I'm sorry, you can go back, you can watch this clip, I apologize, I don't want to try and end friendships, but this is the most important thing now, because it's existential, it's a matter of life and death. We're just not having any more terror attacks, I'm afraid. It's all optional, they don't need to be here, they can all go. At the moment, this is Farage's position from Winston Marshall's show, right?
If we politically alienate the whole of Islam, we will lose. We'll lose.
So how does one include
We
them?
will lose. By 2050, goodness knows what kind of a terrible state we're going to be in.
So I'd ask Nigel Farage, which parts of the Quran and Hadith does he want to officially adopt as part of Reform's party platform? What does winning look like at the end of this appeasement strategy, Nigel? If winning means the continued growth of Islam in Britain, then we will lose, just slightly slower. And that's if you think that you'll be able to slow it down. This is Farage's current position. He hasn't reversed course from this. The party themselves have said they banned the Muslim Brotherhood. Again, very welcome policy, right? I'm not counter-signaling that at all. When Reform do things I like, I reward them. When they don't do things I like, well, stay tuned for a stream tomorrow. We'll discuss Reform tomorrow, and The Spectator, and Unheard, and the state of the British right. But today, this seems more pressing. We need to force this issue because we're not in any doubt that Islam is behind these terror attacks. It's patently obvious to everyone. And so we can just stop pretending now. We can, stop making believe at the expense of people's lives. Whether it's Jewish, whether it's English, whether it's adults, whether it's children, no one else needs to die, no one else needs to be assaulted. So, why is Islam incompatible? Let's go through the reasons. I did this piece in the aftermath of the Yom Kippur attack. Notice how I framed it. Can Islam exist in the Christian West? Because as much as these Islamic terrorists have been attacking Jewish events, they see us as equally culpable. They see us Christians and white people as fair game, equal targets. So, here's some insight into why these terrorists do what they do, right? The dividing line for Muslims is between those who act upon the call for violence against infidels in the Quran and Hadiths, and those who passively await the emergence of the promised caliphate. Make no mistake, both Sunni and Shia, the Salafists, they all want the return of a caliphate. It's just who is it led by and by what means. As one moderate imam told jihadist Ed Hussein in Among the Mosques, which is the yellow book just over my shoulder, I recommend everyone read it, our students ask us, when is the caliphate coming? I always say to them, do your part, qualify, take to community service in the mosque, and the caliphate will come. This is a guy who's liaising with the government, by the way, according to Ed. So, moderate. In either case, Islam will not sustain our civilization. So while Islam cosplays an Abrahamic religion, it has no common cause with the Christianity that preceded England being a unified kingdom and formed our high-trust society from pious nuclear family units. The West is not comprised of, as Bacha Unga Sargon said, a Judeo-Christian Muslim worldview. All are incoherent. It's also not comprised from a Judeo-Christian worldview, I'm afraid. Yoram Hazoni even agrees with me on this. Judaism and Christianity are separate. They are divided by multiple things, but one, Jews don't recognize the divinity of Christ. Christianity is a universal religion. Judaism is an ethnically particular tribal religion. And the rabbinic sects of Judaism, those who study the Talmud and take certain interpretations seriously, don't have much respect for Christianity. So there are some differences in theology, in ethnicity, in civilization between Christians and Jews. They don't always have to be a source of antagonism. Sometimes they are. See my video on liberal Jews, unfortunately for that. But there are differences. And so Christian civilizations are not Judeo-Christian. That was a term invented in the aftermath of the Second World War to win sympathy over for the Israeli project. You can be sympathetic to Israel. That's your prerogative. I'm indifferent. It's another country to me. So long as they preserve the Christian holy sites, because that's what makes it slightly special, but that's only special because it's a site of Christian history. It's not special because the Jews live there, right? But you cannot pretend that there aren't differences between our peoples, and you cannot pretend that England will not exist without Judaism, for example. Or rabbinic Talmudic Judaism. Again, separate religion. I don't have any animosity, but you can't pretend there aren't tensions there, even if they're not violent like they are between Muslims and Jews and Muslims and Christians. I think I'm very reasonable, but hey, I'll get cancelled somehow, I'm sure. So, as Arabist Alfred Guillaume explains, after arriving in Mecca from Medina, the Hijra, the migration, which is a religious duty in Islam, by the way, hence so much Muslim migration into Europe, Muhammad tried to convert the city's Jewish tribes with little success. He expelled them from the Hijaz, a region encompassing Mecca and Medina, the sort of holiest area in the Arab world, and stopped praying towards Jerusalem. Muhammad incorporated the Jewish tradition into Islam by claiming Abraham and Ishmael had founded the pagan Kaaba monument in Mecca and had always worshipped Allah. Muhammad retroactively then made the patriarchs of the Bible, Adam, Noah, Abraham, David, into prophets to persuade Jews to submit to Islam. This was despite Muhammad himself having a very poor understanding of Judaism, because he accused the Jews of worshipping Ezra, which they don't, and accusing them of being polytheists, this mushrik. Again, I'm not a native Arabic speaker, so you'll have to apologise for my butchering of the pronunciation. Hence why Muhammad's critics at the time of the Quran accused him of fabricating with the help of others and passing off ancient fables that he has written down as revelations from God. Even some of Muhammad's own followers nicknamed him the Ear because he believed whatever he had been told last. Muhammad showed similar disrespect to Christianity. In the account of the first revelation, when the angel Gabriel apparently appeared to Muhammad in the cave of Hira to recite Quran verse 96, 1-5, in the mountains outside Mecca, Muhammad thought he had been possessed by a jinn, a demon. It was only when his wife, Khadijah, despite not being present at the incident, convinced him it was the angel Gabriel that Muhammad thought it was a holy revelation. So Muhammad himself thought he was demonically possessed. I think maybe we should take him at his word. Gabriel then reappeared in the Quran to rebuke Muhammad for reciting pagan phrases during prayer, but he didn't appear when Muhammad returned to Mecca in 630 AD and ordered the iconoclastic destruction of all Christian paintings except for those of the Virgin and the Christ child, because the one thing that the Quran affirms about Jesus Christ was that he was born of a virgin. It doesn't affirm the incarnation. It doesn't say he is the Son of God. It doesn't say that he was crucified. It doesn't say that he died and rose again. It says that basically Jesus was an elaborate con man who seems to have switched himself out with another person to fool the Romans into thinking he was dead, and then he didn't actually die, but then he'll come back on Judgment Day anyway. Again, denies the fundamental truth claims of Christianity, because the worst sin in Islam is reducing Allah to an analogy, an anthropomorphism, or an idol. It's called shirk. It's the unforgivable sin. And so that means that the core faith claim of Christianity, that Jesus Christ was incarnated, Son of God, God incarnate, that means it's the gravest sin in Islam. Christianity and Islam can't be reconciled. And I tell you what, even if our countries are no longer very Christian, there will probably be non-committal Christians in chat. There'll be some people who are cultural Christians. There'll be some people who think that we can get past the whole Christianity thing. There'll probably even be some pagans in here, right? I know it's popular at the moment. It doesn't matter whether or not you believe it. They believe you believe it. And they will treat you like believers. They will put civilizational guilt upon you, whether you like it or not. And so, they will treat you like irredeemable sinners, committers of shirk. And they will act accordingly. And they have been acting accordingly. So, you hear a lot in Islam that Christ is considered a prophet. Again, I just want to equip you with an understanding of what you're arguing against, and also the bullshit lines that respective liberal politicians and media people buy about Islam being, a religion of peace when it means submission, and it was carved onto the rock, on the dome of the rock when Muhammad visited, hence giving Islam its name, and that Islam has great respect for Christianity. It's an Abrahamic religion. It's basically the next book of the Bible. No. So Christ is considered a prophet, but only retroactively incorporated on behalf of Allah. This is because Muhammad wanted to incorporate the Jews and Christians into Islam, the sort of Islamic super tribe at the time, to coalesce all of the tribes in the various regions under the Muslim banner. Actually, he had a deathbed proclamation that Jews and Christians should be purged from their respective areas of the Arabian Peninsula. I think it was in this book I was reading recently by Bernard Lewis, and I actually didn't know about this section. So it says here, the classical Arabic historians tell us in the year 20 of the Muslim era, corresponding to 641 AD, the Caliph Umar decreed that Jews and Christians should be removed from all but the southern and eastern fringes of Arabia in fulfillment of an injunction of the Prophet uttered on his deathbed, quote, "Let there not be two religions in Arabia." The people in question were the Jews of the oasis of Khaybar in the north and the Christians of the Najran in the south. Both were ancient and deep-rooted communities, Arab in their speech, culture, and their way of life, differing from their neighbours only in their faith. Faith matters a lot to these people, even if it doesn't matter a lot to you. Even if ethnicity doesn't matter much to you, it matters a lot to them, and they will act on it in violent fashion. Sorry, the gap in my shelf was bothering me. So the Quran rejects Christ's divinity, denies the resurrection, and Islamic prophecy says Christ will return on Judgment Day to then break his cross, kill the false Messiah, abolish the jizya, which is a tax on both Christians and Jews living in Muslim lands, and command Christians to then submit to Muhammad's teachings, and those that don't get killed. So it says that Jesus Christ will then validate Islam when he returns, and all these foolish Christians will see him shattering the cross in an act of supreme disrespect to Christian symbolism, and tell them to either submit to the true God, or, well, they get the Quranic punishment for being apostates or kafir, unbelievers. Of course, it contradicts the Bible, where in the Gospel of John, it says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you know me, you will know my Father also." So the truth claims of Islam and Christianity are irreconcilable. Now, this does explain, as the likes of Raymond Ibrahim and Tom Holland have written about before, the war between Christians and Muslims that has been going on ever since the 7th century. I mean, again, this comes back to the idea that just being against Islam is like a pro-Zionist Jewish psyop. Actually, European white identities were forged in direct contradiction to Muslim invaders. I mean, think of the Moors occupying bits of Italy and Spain. Think of the Crusades. Think of the Barbary pirates kidnapping 250,000 slaves from the Cornish coast. Was it 1.25 million over the course of the entire slave trade? I mean, Muslims were obsessed with the people of yellow, basically blonde women. And so the early caliphs would put a price on European women and kidnap them and enslave them. So European identities, white identities, our cultures, have been defined in opposition to invading others, mainly from the Muslim world. So no, opposing Islam is not just a contemporary, pro-Israel psyop. It absolutely... Israel does not feature at all into my opposition to Islam, and Israel has nothing to do with Pakistani grooming gangs. It has something to do, probably, with this terror attack and the recognition of Palestine by the UK and Australia, because it has emboldened Muslims in those countries to see an inch given and a mile therefore up for grabs. But my opposition to Islam has nothing to do with Israel. And it doesn't have to be. Islam will replace you whether or not you're against ZOG. And in here, by the way, tell a small story. In the Holy Land, Muslims have been mogging Christians for a long time with the complicity of Jewish authorities, because one of the gates on the outer wall is bricked up to prevent Christ, should he return, according to prophecy, from going through that gate. And there's a graveyard in front of it, an Islamic graveyard, to stop the Messiah from crossing the ground laden with dead bodies in case he is defiled. And also, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre has a minaret towering over it, built by the Saracens. It's just slightly higher. And one of the doors into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where, the Mount of Golgotha, where Christ was crucified, is contained, where his cross is said to have been held, where the tomb of both Christ and Joseph of Arimathea is. One of the doors is bricked up. It's the right-hand door. So you go through the left-hand door, which is also an act of humiliation. And 2 Muslim families have the keys to the doors, and they've passed it down over centuries. So Muslims control access to the holiest site in Christianity for Christians. And that's just happening, again, in the Holy Land. So they just don't like us. They never will. And this is because the Quran commands Muslims to befriend neither Christians or Jews, lest they be counted as one of them. Imams teach that the Torah and the Gospel were corrupted and that Jews and Christians are pigs and monkeys. Surahs instruct Muslims to fight the unbelievers, wherever they find them, and force them to either convert or pay the jizya. Jihad, by the way, is most commonly associated in the Quran and Hadith with mujahideen, meaning fighters or fighting. And there was a caliph who wrote an entire book of verses on jihad, and he said, jihad is my way of life, and he meant war making. So, make no mistake, the terror attacks that are happening in Christian countries, whether they're against Jews or whites, against Jews or Christians, this is just a fulfillment of their holy duty against us. Doesn't matter. This is why there are terror attacks happening in Nigeria against Nigerian Christians. Judaism is not present there at all. It's just a Muslim thing. It really is a Muslim thing. So irrespective of your criticisms of Israel or of left-wing Jews, which I have made on my channel, by the way, go back and watch those videos, so I'm consistent on this, Islam is a problem. It will continue to be a problem so long as it is in our countries. Verses are often repeated, by the way, by jihadists like Omar Bakri, who founded Al-Majroom, who cited them to justify drummer Lee Rigby's murder. Also, I believe Sadiq Khan's brother-in-law, who he claims he's disavowed and never spoken to for years, was also part of Al-Majroom. Interesting. Other verses tell Muslims when you meet the disbelievers in battle, strike their necks until you have thoroughly subdued them and bind them firmly, and that Allah will cast horror into the hearts of disbelievers, so strike their necks and strike their fingertips. Again, all sources are linked and available in this article. The article, which I will now link and post in the chat. Now, why do they have such a problem with Jews? Well, it's because not only at the time, according to Alfred Guillaume, again, an Arabist who's very soft on Islam, the Jews were famous for their irrigation technology in the desert. They were market traders, which they seem to do wherever they go. And so there was some resentment about them holding a disproportionate amount of wealth within the community. But also, Jewish and Qurayshi tribes were defeated at the Battle of Kondak, and Muhammad ordered the male captives to be beheaded and the women enslaved. And then when he besieged Khaybar, he massacred Jewish inhabitants and subjected the survivors to the jizya. He took Zainab, a widow, and his first cousin as his 7th wife. Why does Muhammad have a Jewish cousin? Well, this isn't something that Muslims like to talk about, but there is a theory, actually, that Muhammad, if he did exist, because there aren't any sources confirming his existence until about 100 years after he is said to have been alive. The original sources for the biography for Muhammad are just not available. But it is possible that Muhammad himself was partially, if not wholly, ethnically Jewish. Same with quite a few of the scholars who compiled the hadiths. Some of them were ex-rabbis. Some of them were also ex-Zoroastrians, which is why you got strange things like the Zoroastrian toothbrush being incorporated into the hadiths as a really autistic way of saying how Muhammad brushed his teeth, because it was vogue in Zoroastrianism at the time, so it just sort of exported itself into Islamic scripture, and now you get the Salafists only brushing their teeth in a really specific, antiquated way. Very strange. Anyway, Zainab, then, who was a widow, pretty peeved off about the fact that her husband was butchered and then she was subjected to being Muhammad's sex slave. She fed poisoned lamb to Muhammad and his followers. She killed one of his followers. Zainab was executed, and to this day, Jews are blamed for killing the Prophet because he said that he would die of a stomach problem and the injury that was... he said he would die of a wound to the throat, and the injury that was said to have been inflicted upon him by eating the poisoned lamb contributed to his death. So they say that without being fed poisoned lamb by a Jewish woman, Muhammad would have lived. So this is an intergenerational blood feud between Jews and Muslims now playing out in the Christian West. There are also hadiths, of course, that tell Muslims on Judgment Day until they fight the Jews. So, engaging in war with Jewish people is meant to bring about Judgment Day, the return of the Caliphate, the return of Muhammad himself, and that the rocks and the trees on Judgment Day will come alive, saying, "Oh Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me," directing Muslims to kill them. Only the Garkad tree, which is the tree of the Jews, apparently will remain silent, because, as David Wood would joke, Garkad ain't no snitch. These prophecies were, of course, quoted in the 1988 Hamas Covenant and in the 2017 Revised Charter, which, of course, explains the principal motives of Globalize the Intifada, the Islamic Resistance Movement, and October the 7th. It's genocide of Jews. So, again, you don't have to like Israel's response. You don't have to agree with Israel. You certainly don't have to like American foreign policy on Israel's behalf, and I don't, because also it's implicated my country in Iraq and Afghanistan. But you can't doubt that the motivation of Hamas or Islamic Jihad or ISIS or all of these respective terror attacks are killing all Jews because they think Judgment Day is going to come. And they have the same fate in mind for Christians too, which is why when they chant globalize the Intifada in Britain, even if every Jew left Britain for Israel, they would still be chanting it because they mean it for us as well. So they just can't be in our countries. They just can't be here. Sorry, they're the ones writing it all. But we have an intractable political problem, and I'll end before about 1:30 and I'll read some super chats. The intractable political problem we have is that our politicians are still reluctant to, or refuse outright, to recognise differences between peoples. And this has been elucidated in a recent debate between Rupert Lowe and other politicians. So, let's go mute this. Rupert tweeted that he's getting the usual backlash for stating the obvious when it comes to London's rapid descent into dump status. Easy to say all is going swimmingly from fancy pubs in Whitehall or a leafy suburb in Surrey, or in Piers Morgan's completely ethnically English enclave, from which he gets a taxi to and from his studio or the local curry house. He says the rest of us can see what has happened to our capital city, and we do not like him. One of my most salient political moments was in 2011, the London riots happened. As a kid, I was glued to the TV screen watching buildings burn down. There was that famous image of the furniture shop, I think it was in Croydon, on fire. They were raiding Lewisham. They came as far as Eltham. And at the time, I wasn't living too far from that. I was living on the bus route directly through Eltham High Street. And so if the EDL hadn't have fought with the largely black rioters at the time, they could have come up my road, done something to my house. Because they were just setting fire to things. It was terrifying as a kid. And now I look at areas of London, it's like the riots never stopped. They're smothered in graffiti, everywhere's boarded up. There's still men in balaclavas just going around, committing random petty crime. I went to a trigonometry Christmas party on Tuesday, and I was waiting in London Bridge for a little while for my wife to come and meet me in London from where she was staying at home. And there were two urban youths, Mizzies, that were roaming around London Bridge Station with a bike tyre from an electric bike with the cable still hanging out the tyre. So they clearly just ripped it off a bike that they'd stolen. Milling around and trying to find the perfect barrier that was wide enough to smuggle the tyre through and burst through. So they went up and down, they looked at the entire place, and then they just sprinted and shoulder barged through the disabled barriers. And they were, they make that really loud blaring siren noise to then indicate to the bored second generation migrant who's just playing Candy Crush on his phone at the barriers and not paying attention, to look up and do absolutely nothing about it. Why should I have to endure this? This shouldn't be happening in my city. These petty crimes, these violent crimes, these phone thefts. I've had a friend recently had their phone stolen. Why are we enduring any of this? I don't want to go into London anymore. I don't want my wife to go into London. It's not very safe. So all of this is well and good for rich, insulated people to respond to and poo-poo, like Tom Tugendhat. Tom Tugendhat's a spook, by the way. He goes to all the Bilderberg meetings. He is more obsessed with the territorial integrity of Israel and Ukraine than he is with the safety of our own country, and he is an unrepentant one-nation conservative, meaning he supports mass migration, he's a progressive, he's pro-ECHR, so we'll do absolutely nothing about the problem. So he writes, there's a lot of talk about London. Here's some context. As security minister, I often walked an hour from Parliament to where I stay in London. The house or the office often kept me past 10 o'clock at night, and while I could take a government driver, it was good to walk at the end of a long day. In those 2 years, I was responsible for our secrets and worked with people conducting operations at home and abroad. Still, I walked home at night. The walk took me along the river and through housing estates, past restaurants still open for shift workers and others closing as the family moved upstairs after long days. I heard many different languages spoken, and I saw signs in Arabic, Ethiopian, Persian, Portuguese, Spanish, and more. I wasn't living in Chelsea or anywhere near, except for the regular wafts of dope smoked openly in the street, which you did nothing about. And for the dirty streets when litter went uncollected, London is safe. I felt threatened only by drunks who looked unpredictable, even at midnight, walking in a suit through parts of the city that seemed to have more living below the median income than above it. Ah, yes, it's drunk crypto and finance bros staggering home from the pub, where they're paying £10 a pint, that are the real threat, Tom. I'm definitely sure that they are the ones that are committing a rape every hour. I'm sure they're all the ones that I've been seeing on video riding up and down Oxford Street with 2 men on the back of an electric bike snatching phones out of women's hands. I'm sure they're the ones that have been going up to women at bus stops and intimidating them with sexual advances, or else they get stabbed. I'm sure my eyes have just been lying to me this whole time. Anyway, he says, there are many problems in London. Housing costs, construction delays, overtaxing, homelessness, and weak leadership from Whitehall and City Hall, and yes, petty crime are all just logistical issues. If you just, fund enough youth clubs and build more homes and change some regulation, everything would be great. No, there are lots of people that do not fit in, that should not be here, that commit crimes, that have demographically and aesthetically transfigured our formerly great city, and you brought them in. So this is your fault. He says, murders are down and violence is down. No, murders are down because medical technology has improved to such a point where the number of stabbings which are increasing are non-lethal. Violence is not down. There are certain kinds of violence which are down, but again, stabbings, knife crime, and rape is up. They're very severe, and the people that are perpetrating them never needed to be here. I think, what is it? 63% of all knife offences and knife murders are committed by black boys. Okay, they're not native to England. Why were they inflicted on us? Again, there are some nice black people. Doesn't mean that any single black gangster needs to be here. Who's committing all the rapes? We'll get onto that in a moment. But it is interesting that the fear for one's safety from a sexual attack never entered Tom's mind here. Why is that? Because he's a man. Oh, you're a white knight. No, men and women are different. Men and women are physically different and temperamentally different. And men should be not just looking out for the women that they love and are around, but should be building a civilization that is safe for women. Broadly, you can't stop every predator out there. Broadly safe for women to walk the streets of their own capital city. Maybe not late at night. You want to be careful. This is just advice that I would give to any woman, no matter the circumstances. But the fact that Tom Tugendhat did not have that concern shows how disconnected he is from all of my female friends, for example, and my wife and that, who do not feel safe in their own capital city. And they shouldn't, because again, rape every hour. And those are just the ones that are reported and prosecuted. So, he says, we need to fix our capital and hold the checked out Labour mayor to account. He's not checked out. He knows exactly what he's doing. He enjoys this. He says it's part and parcel of living in a big city. He says that white people don't represent London. He is happy in demographically terraforming London. Do you see how uncomfortable he looked at the Christian carol service? But he loves lighting up Oxford Street for Eid. He knows what he's doing. He's making the country a worse place. He's making our capital city a worse place. He is rewarding his co-ethnics. He says we need more Muslim housing in mosques, Tom. This is not something that your antiquated blank slate liberalism can fix. You have to notice differences to fix the problem, and then be willing to act upon those differences, to take precautionary measures that prevent any further perpetrators of violent crime coming into the country, and then to return the likely perpetrators and unwanted, uninvited guests to their nations of origin so that no more people can make our country a worse place. He says, I still walk at night. Okay, Wayne Broadhurst doesn't. Rhiannon Sky White doesn't. Lots of the victims of the Pakistani grooming gangs, which are operating in London, by the way, that Sadiq Khan has denied, but we know from leaks from the Met Police that they are happening. But they don't walk alone at night. But they don't even leave their house. All well and good for you, Tom. I'm glad that you basically have a tourist's relationship to your own country, but we don't, because we can't escape to anywhere else. We're not rich enough. We're not well connected enough with international intelligence agencies. Turns out we're stuck here. So, the worst one, though, wasn't Tom Tugendhat. The worst one was my old nemesis, devouring mother in question, Stella Creasy. So she quote-tweeted Rupert Lowe. "You don't speak truth for anyone but yourself, Rupert. Last time I was followed, it was this summer by a white man in his car in a sleepy Norfolk village as I went running, and it was terrifying as the road's empty, so no help around. Focus on the crimes, tackle the causes, stop talking rubbish that gets in the way of doing either." Okay. The fact that you were followed by a dodgy white bloke does not mean we keep importing foreign rapists from countries that reliably produce foreign rapists, Stella. Because creepy white bloke is our problem. And I think, let's just take your story on face for the sake of argument, even though I don't believe a word you say about anything. Let's just say that he was a creepy stalker. Okay, let's have much harsher penalties for said creepy stalkers. Perhaps let's have the same penalty for creepy stalkers, Stella, that you want to give to, I don't know, unborn babies as at the moment they're about to emerge from the womb. I think rapists and stalkers are probably more deserving of the death penalty than unborn children. Oh, you don't, Stella? Well, perhaps your morality is entirely inverted. Given that you support killing more unborn children than the Mayans and the Incans and the Aztecs, you might have something inverted about your worldview. But Stella, yet again, refuses to draw distinctions between the types of criminals and crimes that can be prevented because certain men commit more crimes. And it seems those men, or those diasporas, those demographics, make up the overwhelming number of her constituency in Walthamstow, because she's going to be unseated by an independent Muslim MP at the next election, or probably a Green Party MP, or something. So, Rupert replied, "You're an MP. Why have you banned comments on your post?" She does that all the time. "It's pathetic. Throw stones and then won't even accept replies. Millions of women feel increasingly unsafe in London and in all of our cities. MPs like you just don't care. Some feminist." True. Patriot. Absolutely the case. I'm just going to mute people in chat that are going to start chains that are going to get me banned. Okay? Just behave yourselves in chat if you want to keep my channel open. Realize I live in basically a totalitarian state and I already get myself in enough trouble. Maybe don't try and get me in trouble with the government, please. Behave. I love you, chat, but behave. Anyway. So Stella Creasy responded, and magically, this time she left the comments on. Now, Elon Musk should force all elected officials to not only leave the comments on their posts, because Sadiq Khan turns them off all the time, they shouldn't be allowed to block either. Because Iqbal Muhammad has blocked me, because he didn't like the fact that I kept ratioing about Islam. You, as an elected MP, shouldn't be able to block anyone, especially not verified accounts. So Stella responds, "As we can see, Rupert Lowe is selective about the risks to women he is concerned about and his support for those women, those who experience such incidents." I know she's a crippling midwit, but could you possibly write coherent sentences, Stella? "This shows his agenda isn't about tackling violence against women. Making his reshare my comments in order to respond means he calls himself out." Again, doesn't make any sense. But this shows Rupert's agenda isn't about tackling violence against women. Okay, let's link this into the previous terror attack comment, because you might be thinking, what has this got to do with anything? Let's say your agenda is stopping anti-Semitism, like Chris Philp, or stopping terror attacks. Right? It's a noble goal. Stopping terror attacks, no matter the target. Stopping murder. Let's say your agenda is about stopping murder and violence against women. So then I pointed out to Stella, given for the first time she has her comments on, that miraculously comments are turned on for this post, so let me take the opportunity to ask you, Stella, if we can prevent rapes by not importing rapists, should we? It's a very simple yes or no. Half the sex crimes in London could be prevented with a simple policy change. Ultimatum, right? I present you with a very clear way of stopping half or more of rapes. Half. So it looks like a lot of people agree with this one, considering the views versus likes ratio. She responds, "I brook to no one in the fight to tackle sexual violence anywhere, including in London, which is why I am frustrated misogyny as a hate crime yet to be implemented." Irrelevant thing. I'm just going to squid ink in front of you and push my particular pet project, which then broadens out the very specific category of crime that you are asking me to eliminate to all men. It collectively implicates men and thereby makes a solution impossible because you can never, as she suggests, ban all men from London. No, Stella, you know exactly what you're doing. You know exactly what you're doing. Sorry, you might try and play dumb here, but I've just presented you with very clear evidence. And she says, I can read that data and how you have interpreted it. Yes. Yes, you can read that data. You have decided to read it a different way through motivated reasoning, because you insist that we cannot draw distinctions between groups of people, between ethnicities, between cultures, because that would be racist. I insist that I am willing to be called a racist by observing very clear distinctions between groups of people, and thereby, by observing that distinction, preventing half of rapes. Do you know what Stella does? She instead says, well, are you going to ban 100% of men from London? No, Stella. No, because men, quote unquote, aren't committing the sex offences, Stella. Foreign men, who do not need to be in the country, are committing more than half of the sex offences. So you could stop more than half of sex offences by removing the men whose presence in our country is a consequence of government policy. Why won't you? We should deport them. We shouldn't allow one more man in from nations which reliably produce rapists and sex criminals because they see white women as less than meat, Stella. We shouldn't import low IQ criminals from the third world, Stella. If those specific men were not physically present in our country as a consequence of government policy, then half the rapes in London would stop tomorrow. Why don't you want to prevent that, Stella? It is a real, possible policy that keep women like my wife and the rest of my family safe, and she could be pushing for that. She could be telling our government to do that tomorrow. But instead, she's retreated from the Bailey to the Mott, or is it the other way around? To this, Mott to the Bailey, to this vague abstraction of blaming all men to distract from the practical policy by proposing the impossible. And again, I link to previous reporting that I've done. This will come up in tomorrow's stream. This is still happening. There are Indian nationals now filming white women and implying that if you, a man from the Indian subcontinent, come over via either an illegal boat across a small channel or via a student visa and then claim asylum, that white women will be falling at your feet. They still see white women as sex objects. They are propagandized to see them as willing and waiting for men from the subcontinent. And so they have this expectation set for them, and when that expectation isn't met, they enact it in violent fashion, which is why, as an overall number, Indians are the most responsible for sex attacks, and why, per capita, proportionate to their share of the population, it's Afghans and Eritreans. Now, actually, per capita doesn't matter that much when it comes to migrant crime, because every single migrant criminal is in the country as a consequence of government policy. So we could just stop all of them coming at once, no matter the share or proportion of the population that they are versus their likelihood of committing crime. But we can make immigration red lists based on per capita. And so if Stella wanted to start somewhere, maybe banning Afghanistan and Eritrea and India from migration would keep women and girls safe. But if you notice, suddenly the thread stops. Maybe because she realised she only got one like. Almighty ratio. So what did Stella Creasy respond? Well, she rediscovered the quote retweet function and the ability to turn off replies. And it's because, and this goes back to the terror attack, right? These people know who they're importing, they know what they're doing, they know what the inevitable consequence of their policies will be, but they either just lie or they shut their eyes and sing la 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 la, and they pretend that building a Leviathan state around these building ethnic and religious tensions that are resulting in sex crime, terror attacks, and murder, they pretend that this will either work, or, of course, they don't care if it works, it just suits their interests because they can enrich and empower themselves at the expense of the corpses of Jews on Bondi, or the abused girls of Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford, London, Bradford, Oldham, take your pick. Stella Creasy knows, because I presented her with the incontrovertible evidence multiple times, with the argumentation that she's apparently read. And she just goes, men, but not men? Seems these accounts are very confused about sex and identity indeed. Stella, you think a man can self-identify as a woman? Fuck off with your sophistry. Seriously. Get fucked. Nobody believes you. You, instead, would like to signal your progressive platitudes at the expense of the safety of women and girls. You're disgusting, and everyone knows it. The evidence shows us abuse and harm exists in all societies towards women, and no factor, nationality, sex, age, social class, media platforms should stop us fighting it. No, actually, nationality, sex, age, social class, religion actually does influence whether or not men will commit abuse against women. If you notice again, can't reply to this, 12 likes, ooh, pretty shameful. So, let's go on the post engagements. And Nick Dixon has posted Millennial Woes, excellent tweet. It's amazing how much leftist discourse is just them pretending not to understand things, thus making discourse impossible, and thus enabling atrocities that are entirely preventable. But also, I responded, comments off again, so I'll take that as a no. They know what they're doing, they're still doing it. And they know what they're doing, they know the consequences of this, and yet they will continue to encourage it. So I'll finish on this. I might do a video on this particular article and going through it, but it is just the tired old tropes. So this was published 2 days ago. George Monbiot in The Guardian. And before you ask, yes, George Monbiot is. Need I say more? Anyway, Europe must open the door to migrants or face its own extinction. Replacing Europeans with non-Europeans is extinction. We are not fungible, swappable, universal units. We are not widgets. We are not cogs that can fit into the great GDP-generating machine seamlessly or with a little bit of state-assisted lubrication in the form of social housing, welfare subsidies, English classes, or lowering Union Jacks as to not offend the newcomers. We are a particular people with a civilization and a religion and traditions and families. And if you aren't conserving people, then you aren't conserving anything at all. And George Monbiot knows this. But George Monbiot, at his own personal expense, will continue to push mass migration, despite him being a liberal, a Jewish man. He will continue to push this, even at the risk of himself being targeted. And so, there is no conversation with people like this. You can't accommodate them, you can't appease them, you just need to be very forthright about your position. Now, it means that there will be people on your right. And look, I've always had these people nipping at my heels. I think largely because they've misunderstood me and me trying to be prudent about tactics. But you'll always have people on your right that you perhaps disagree with how far things should go for. But those disagreements should be had with the shared project in mind of restoring our demographics, our nation, our Christian faith should be central to that, because you don't have England without Christianity. I mean, it formed our nuclearized family units and ended cousin marriage, after all. And making sure that we can have single income household owning, home owning families as the standard. There will be people that go a bit further than you, there will be people that go a bit further than me. I am happy to converse with those people and hash it out and litigate the differences. What I am not happy to have is a political climate that demands I justify the existence of my people and my civilization to ethnocidal communists like George Monbiot, who thinks we should end all farming, which would just result predictably in famine, while basically Israel gets to be an ethno-state for its own people, and demented feminists like Stella Creasy, who insist on aborting every child that she can feasibly justify at any stage of pregnancy, while pretending that there aren't men, predictably, that come from barbaric cultures, from Muslim countries, from Africa, who commit vast amounts of sex and violent crime against girls that could be stopped tomorrow if she just had the courage to notice the differences. I'm not going to sit there and justify my country, my culture, my heritage, and defend it against erasure and replacement. I'm not going to sit there and squirm and feel put on the spot by you. Instead, I'm just going to be very clear and allow me to hope not hate. I know you're watching. You can print this in State of Hate report and I'll stand by every syllable. The only way to stop further terror attacks like the Bondi one, or any ones that have been in Germany or France or Britain or America, the only way to stop Pakistani grooming gangs, the only way to stop half of all rapes in London, the only way to stop various knife and violent crimes in our capital cities, remigration. It's the only way. It's the only sensible solution. It's not cruel, it's necessary. And this is going to continue because This mindset is endemic across the Anglosphere because this was earlier this year in Australia. Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. Why they are a shared challenge, not a competition. There are still liberal Jewish writers that need to be opposed by right-wing Jews. And I've been told to drop this subject, by the way, by a concerned Jewish friend, but I'm going to keep hammering the drum to keep insisting that you guys do this. There are still going to be liberal Jews that insist that our respective countries in the white Christian West have to be multicultural and accommodating to people who hate us, who also hate Jewish people, who then can retreat to Israel if things get too hot. We don't have an Israel. We just have England, Australia, America. This is where we make our final stand. And it is crucial that you start noticing differences and pointing them out. Because otherwise, we don't get to have a civilization. We need to be rolling the pitch and laying the groundwork for who gets to stay and who doesn't. And we need to be putting pressure on respective parties and politicians to commit to that principle. It's not good enough for Chris Philp to say hate speech legislation is the solution. The Conservatives deserve to die if they continue to do this. It's not good enough for Nigel Farage to say just ban the Muslim Brotherhood. No, Islam is a problem, and you having two prominent Muslim spokespeople is a problem. It's encouraging that Ben Habib actually today held Nigel Farage's feet to the fire on that, but Advance UK is not yet a political party, and it needs some serious people in it. Rupert doesn't currently have a party. Rupert gets everything right. No notes for Rupert here, right? But Rupert is currently Cincinnatus at his plough. He hasn't quite put it down yet to take up the office of state. Anyway, I hope all of that was interesting. I don't know how to refresh my super chats on Streamlabs, but I will get them up and quickly address them. Thank you all very much for tuning in and spending the evening with me. I will have my dinner very shortly, but I thought I would address your remarks first because you've been so generous. Someone says hi from Portugal. Hello. $10 from a name that I won't read out. It's easy to blackpill when these things happen, but let us not forget our history. We retook Iberia. If things go our favours, as they seem to be, we will have Lebanon within our lifetime, maybe Jerusalem. Reconquista is always on the table. Never blackpill. Jules says, so frustrated. I have an MA in Holocaust Studies and love the Jewish people. I promised my survivor friends I would never forget and would protect the Jewish people. But what can I do? Protect your own people. Look, ultimately, this is the thing we can actually learn from Jewish diasporas. Jews will always take care of themselves. And it's completely reasonable to do so, by the way. Every people should look out for themselves. And by people, I mean the network of families that you love and know and are familiar to you. It's not this abstract sort of save the white race caricature. It is, okay, I know my family, my friends, my community, my congregation, these concentric circles of love and covenants that form a nation. Protect your people. Start from the bottom up and build it out as wide as your ability to extend Aura Morris will allow you, but don't go so far afield of the heat map that you love all of humanity in general and start abiding by the blank slate. And that's what Jewish people do. To great success, by the way, because they wouldn't be so prominent in politics and have Israel command the loyalties of lots of politicians otherwise. You should be demanding from your politicians the same level of loyalty that they have to Israel, actually greater level of loyalty, rather. They should treat Israel like any other state. You should demand the loyalty that they often show to Israel of your country, whether it's England, like the Super Chatter, whether it's America, whether it's Australia, whether it's Europe. Completely reasonable. WG says, the guy who stopped the gunman wasn't Muslim. Community Notes corrected it already. He's white and didn't... I don't think that's true, actually. I think they got the right chap. So I think you may have been misled there. 30 Australian dollars from Philip. God bless you, man. You're a wonderful people, and I hold your family tight because it was a Hanukkah event today, but it'll be a Christian event tomorrow, almost undoubtedly. Dragon Lady, who I believe, if I could be wrong, was a Lotus Eaters viewer back in the day. You got a license for that common sense, Connor? Actually, I don't. I just say things, and if they come and knock down my door, then it only continues to repudiate the regime of any legitimacy in the eyes of the public, because I don't think I say anything. I certainly don't incite violence. I speak what I observe to be truths with evidence, and if that offends people, so be it. We should live in a civilization that allows for offense. If we don't, then you live in a tyranny. Neme. They say who they are and what they want to do. Sanity would call that a confession. Yes, when people tell me who they are, I tend to believe them, and I take that approach with the Quran and Hadiths just as much as I do communists on the internet. NTR Uncle says, remember, they don't care that you aren't Jewish or Christian. You're still a non-believer, so they'll go after you as well. You can't run from this. Yes, quite. Especially, you can't run from it when it's being imported into your homeland. So, there is unfortunately no escape from the horrors that our politicians have brought upon us. And final one, Eddie for £5. Why do they keep worrying about anti-Muslim attacks? There aren't any. There was one at Finsbury Park Mosque a number of years ago. Disproportionate, but also, okay, this is not me justifying anything, by the way, but there would not be an attack on a mosque if the mosque weren't in the country, and if said mosques, like Finsbury Park, weren't reliably producing Muslim terrorists. So, the very presence of the foreign diaspora and religion causes discord in the host nation. Why are there no anti-Muslim attacks in Hungary? Why is there no Tommy Robinson in Hungary? Because they haven't betrayed their people. They haven't strip-mined their wealth, ignored their identity. They haven't tried to demographically erase the Magyars. They've recovered from years of the Soviet Union trying to do that, by the way, because they remain the same people. You can recover from economic catastrophe and even a demographic dip and cultural amnesia. You cannot recover from replacement migration. It is the one existential issue, other than, being atomized by a nuclear bomb, that you can't come back from. So it is the issue. Lots of other people are trying to make other issues primary, including Israel-Palestine. And if your issue does not feature your people as either the solution or involved in the conflict, then it's not the friend-enemy issue. The friend-enemy issue will always be demographics and immigration. You can have opinions on foreign policy, and you should, because we shouldn't be implicated in wars that should have nothing to do with us. But the number one issue that should occupy your focus is, how do my people survive? How does my nation survive? How are my friends and family safe? How does my culture continue? Final one from Western Howler for $2. From USA, save the UK. Well, not with £1, I won't. But maybe the Trump economy is worse than I thought. Anyway, sorry for the somber stream, ladies and gentlemen. There'll be one probably tomorrow on Reform UK, spelled Yookay, this new Bangladeshi candidate that's appointed. Bonnie Blue's written a piece in The Spectator supporting reform. We're going to go through the updates for hit pieces on Christianity and Unheard. Who's it for? And then during the week on Wednesday, I'm going to do the promised 100,000 subscriber celebration stream. I am going to be taking super chats and answering questions live. I'm also going to be answering questions from where I asked for them on X, on YouTube community. So you can go and respond to those posts and put questions in there. We're just going to have a chill stream, like an hour and a half, 2 hours maybe. Just chatting about random things that I'll get myself in trouble with. Until then, thank you very much for watching. Take care. God bless. And goodbye.